welcome to the Mindful Fit Pro podcast, the fitness professional's favorite spot for learning about all things mindfulness, mental wellness, and the latest in psychological research. Hi, instructors. Today's episode of the Mindful Fit Pro podcast is going to be a little different. So a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of guest appearing on Charlotte Brawn's podcast, Heart My Fit Biz. And I think it's a great introduction to what I'm doing with the Mindful Fit Pro and what I hope to offer to fitness professionals. So I'm going to replay that podcast episode here. And in the show notes, I'm also going to highlight how you can learn more about Charlotte Brawn's business and get connected with her as well.
Welcome to the Heart My Fit Biz podcast, where we will be covering everything you need for inspiration, motivation, and practical advice in how to create a thriving fitness business. Welcome to this week's podcast episode. This week we have amazing guest, Shelly, the Mindful Fit Pro. Shelly was one of the first people I reached out to in terms of getting her on the podcast and working with her, because I loved everything that she was doing on Instagram. So go and check her out. I'll put everything in the show notes. So today we're going to be talking about mental health, mindfulness, burnout for instructors, but also recognizing that in participants as well. I'm going to hand over to Shelly so she can introduce herself and tell you a little bit about who she is and what she does, and then we'll get straight into the main content and bulk of the episode. So, hello, Shelly. Introduce yourself.
Hello. Well, as you said, my name's Shelly. I'm the face behind Mindful Fit Pro. I am a fitness instructor and really just a teacher at heart. In addition to teaching yoga, Pilates, bar, and pretty much like all the different certifications that you can have, I've tried at one point or another. I also teach undergraduate psychology classes. So teaching is very much what I feel like I've meant to do. And I've been teaching fitness in particular since 2011. I studied psychology in my undergrad and then kind of just fell into teaching yoga when the yoga instructor at my school unexpectedly could no longer teach, and the campus rec reached out to me and they're like, I know you're involved in the yoga club. We really need a yoga instructor. Do you want to teach? And it's really not anything I had ever considered. But I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. Maybe I'll try it out. And then I haven't really looked back since. So I've now come to the point where I'm really merging psychology and fitness, like those two worlds that I had one foot in each. I'm really merging them together for Mindful Fit Pro. So I can kind of really feel like I'm no longer living in two worlds. They're melded together.
Fabulous. Yes. And I think we've kind of shared a similar journey, because I think it was 2011 when I really started to take my fitness career seriously as well. So I think we've kind of had a similar journey, but it's really nice when two things come together and you can really maximize both for the potential of not only yourself, but for your followers and your participants and your clients and everything like that. So amazing. And the knowledge that you have with both of those really serves a wider range of people as well. So let's begin by talking about I want to talk about this first because I went through really bad burnout with teaching too much and taking on too much. And I think to be honest with you, nearly every single guest that I've had on that has come from that fitness background struggles with that burnout, and that it's a combination of everything. It's a combination of burnout, stress, not feeling good enough, imposter syndrome, people pleasing, and there's this whole aspect around all of that. And it's really sad because us as fitness professionals do so much good work, and we are there motivating, being happy, being positive, and putting ourselves out there. And a lot of people don't realize how our mental health is affected how maybe exhausted we are, and we just kind of put that to the back on the back burner, and kind of ourselves come last, really. So I want you to have a little bit of a chat about that, really, and your take on it, and how fitness instructors can recognize, because I think sometimes we also as well just think, oh, I'm okay, and put it to one side, but how to recognize it for ourselves, and when to know when to stop, when to put ourselves first, and tips and advice on that.
Yeah, I think first off, I want to say, like, I 100% have recognized the same thing. Everybody, at least in the fitness industry that I have talked to, the trend is that we are all overachievers. We tend to take on way too much, and it's because we really care, right? So we want to do everything we can to help our clients. And like you said, that often leads to us putting our own mental health and our own self-care on the back burner. It's kind of this like joke that I hear a lot of new instructors say, how like, oh, you're going to start teaching and your self-practice is like totally going to be non-existent. And I'm like, why? Like, it doesn't have to be that way. It gets really busy, but I think prioritizing our own mental health is going to be so important, because it's kind of like that cliche, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So just recognizing that, you know, your own mental health is what matters most. And if you're not taking care of yourself, then you really can't do as well to provide for others, right? Like, you can still be there, but you're not going to be able to do as well as if you're taking care of yourself as a priority. So I wanted to really help with that with Mindful Fit Pro. That was my main goal with starting Mindful Fit Pro, is how can you be a more mindful fitness professional? And with that, you know, it's one thing is recognizing like, okay, your own mindfulness practice and what does that look like? Because for me, I really went through this journey of what I pictured as mindfulness changing. When I first started teaching yoga, I had this impression of mindfulness as being very much tied to that physical practice and seated meditation. And I really struggled with that when I first started for a whole bunch of reasons. Anxiety, I've struggled with, for one. So just sitting still and not fidgeting, I was like, I can't do this. And I thought,
I think a lot of fitness instructors are like that as well, because we are movement people, aren't we? So it's,
Exactly.
it's really hard to, yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that meant I was bad at it. And I think that was just truly due to like not being very naive and just starting out. So as time went on and I learned from other people that no, everybody struggles with this. Like, you may from the outside looking at someone who's meditating think that they're just at peace and totally calm and okay sitting there in stillness, but internally you have no idea what's going on, right? So I wanted to share that kind of journey with other fitness instructors, other personal trainers, of like how your mindfulness practice can look different than what you might normally think. So it doesn't have to be seated meditation. It could be your movement practice is your mindfulness practice. And I really taught from that perspective as well. And I think that that's something that a lot of other fitness professionals I see doing. You know, we don't want to just lead a workout. We want to create this space where people can come and feel like it's this retreat from the stress of whatever they're dealing with at work, whatever they're dealing with at home. And it's really this safe space for them to not have to do anything, not have to have any expectations placed on them. You know, they can not zone out, but they can really be present with themselves without all the extra demands that life puts on us. So I really integrated my mindfulness practice into my movement practice and also into my teaching as well. And that looks a whole bunch of different ways. That could be like starting with an arrival practice where we're taking some time to really transition and not just, okay, let's go, let's get started. Like, make sure your mats are in this position. You got all this equipment. And we're going to start standing, and then you just like jump into teaching, right? So instead, I like to start with an arrival practice to really help my students transition, and then also myself too, because I still get nervous before teaching. So that time to kind of slowly ease into our workout is really helpful for me to kind of check in with like, okay, where am I at today? Like, how much energy am I going to be giving? And if that's not like 120%, that's okay, kind of thing. And then for my students too, giving them that space to transition between coming out of work mode, or say that they were like stuck in traffic and they had to like run into the studio to not get there late, right? Giving them the space to kind of ease out of that stressful state into the rest of our practice together. So that's,
I think that's really important as well, because I think, again, we do put a front on and we do seem confident, but a lot of the time, and a lot of fitness instructors that I've spoken to do still have that like nervousness or anxiety about a class, especially if they're covering a class and it's not their usual class. And I was talking to this about this with another guest expert, because we were talking about the before, during, and after experience of a client. And we were talking about a lot of the time when we get a new participant, it's almost like we make it about ourselves and, oh my God, are they going to like me? Are they going to like the class? And like this whole anxiety thing of that. And then there's the new participant who's like probably thinking the same thing, like, oh my God, like I'm new, So that a lot of the time, the start of our class is an anxious setting, isn't it? Like, and even if you've got a regular participants, you don't know what's going on in their lives, you know, they're rushing from here and there. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good practice. Sorry, I interrupted you there, but I thought that's a really good practice to actually, a lot of people probably wouldn't even think of, but it's so important and actually plays a huge, huge role. Yeah, brilliant. I love that.
Yeah, I think it's really made a difference in my own like nervousness around teaching, giving myself that space, knowing that I don't have to jump in. And that kind of reflects my personality. I am definitely an introvert. I'm one of those like introverts that's disguised as a fitness instructor. So I like to pretend I'm extroverted.
Yeah, literally, this always comes up. Every instructor I speak to is like, oh, I'm really introverted, I'm really shy. But we're not, but we are. It's that thing of like, somebody looking on the outside probably wouldn't think so, but a lot of fitness instructors are introverts. And yeah, that plays a huge role as well, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yes. So that gives me a little bit of time to kind of warm up, right? So it gives me my chance to not just put this expectation on myself that I'm going to be someone different than who I am. Yeah. And then it also helps, you know, talking about like mindfulness for fitness professionals, like that's one way that you can do practice mindfulness in your teaching, but then also as an individual, taking some time to maybe practice mindfulness before you go into the gym or before you go into the studio. So oftentimes I'll like kind of take a few moments in my car to reflect on like, okay, what is the main goal for today? Like, what is my purpose in coming here to teach? Reminding myself, because very much like you said, those thoughts start to creep in where you're like, oh, are they gonna like what I have planned? Like, and then ultimately that translates to like, are they gonna like me? Right? That's what everybody is worried about. Like, are they gonna like me? So just spending some time to, whether it's focus on my breathing or do a body scan, or even just like look around at what's in the environment around me. And like, sometimes I like to do things like looking at particular colors. If I'm really stuck in my head and need to get out of my head, I'll be like, okay, what's something that's green? And I'll just look around and spot the first thing that's green. And that kind of helps stop that thought spiral. I'm no longer kind of going in that circle, chasing my tail of like, are they going to like me? Are they going to pick me kind of mentality? And I can remind myself that that's not really what the goal is. The goal is for me to show up for them. Because the reality is the students coming to your class are not concerned about whether or not they like you. They're just there for themselves, for that escape from whatever it is that's on their mind, or to kind of give back to themselves because they have been pouring out into others, either through their work or because they're parents, or, just they're very caring people too. So as much as we don't recognize our own self-care, sometimes that's happening with our students. So they're really there for themselves and wanting to pour back into their cups. So it really doesn't matter so much about, do they like me as an instructor? It's what can I do for them as their instructor, and to help kind of create the best experience for them.
Absolutely. And what would you say in terms of, when you are teaching a lot and you're teaching all the time, and everyone has those days when they're not motivated, they can't. It's extra hard for instructors because we are in front of people and we are the motivators. People are coming to classes not feeling like it, and we have to motivate them to, put their health first and do the class. So what kind of tips and advice would you give around that kind of thing? Maybe it's got to the end of the week and you're just exhausted and you feel like you can't physically or mentally even go on and motivate others. What would your advice be for instructors in that place?
I think that's a really good question, and one that I had to really, like, someone else had to tell me that was common when I first started teaching. So I'm very lucky that one of the places I teach at, they do trainings at the start of every semester where we get together as a group with other instructors, other personal trainers, and we talk about this kind of stuff, right? And so pretty early on, and when I started teaching, I didn't know that was common. And I thought that meant, oh shoot, like, am I not cut out for this? Like, I don't want to teach today. What does that mean? And you can kind of, it hurts to feel that, because you're like, I do want to be here. I want to teach, but in this moment, I'm so tired. Like, I've taught, however many classes, maybe at another studio, and just had to commute half an hour to get here. And I was just putting a lot of pressure on myself and not being kind, and not recognizing that it's okay to feel tired. It's okay to feel exhausted, and kind of recognizing how that can lead into burnout. And so that's, I think, the number one thing that I just want, especially new instructors, to know, that there will be those times when you don't want to teach. It does not mean you're a bad instructor. It doesn't mean that you're not cut out for this industry. It's just an opportunity to take a look at, like, okay, what can we do differently so that maybe we don't arrive at this space as frequently, or what do we do to care for ourselves when we are feeling like this, right? Yeah. Because it happens. Like, it happens a lot for me when I'm going from teaching in the morning, say teaching like my undergraduate psychology classes, and then I spend a lot of time grading after that. And then I go in and have to teach a cardio class. So I know I'm going to have to pull a lot of energy from an empty tank, because I've just kind of been in this mode where I've been so busy earlier in the day. And so I've had to kind of really almost expect that, like a little bit of tiredness. And then usually by the end of class, like, I'm pumped and I've kind of like got a little like espresso shot from that cardio class and like teaching, and kind of like hyping people up in that class, getting their energy up. So it's one thing I can think of is kind of like knowing that after the class, I'm always going to feel better than at the very beginning of class. It's kind of like when you're talking to yourself, that inner dialogue to even go to work out in the first place, right? Like, before, you're not going to want to do it, but after, you're like, oh, I'm so glad that I took the time to do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's also being honest and being relatable, isn't it? Like we are human as well. And I think as instructors, we always think we have to be superhuman and be like super like there and on it all the time. But actually, sometimes coming to class and saying, this, guys, this, I'm probably feeling a little bit like you guys. I'm a bit deflated today. Let's help each other come together and motivate each other. And that having that relatability as well, somebody who's maybe new to class or somebody who is maybe tired themselves and wasn't going to come to class, just hearing their instructor say, I'm feeling like that as well, can be like, oh, that's okay for everyone to feel like that and to still be here and to come along and show up. So I think the more we pretend to be superhuman makes us sometimes unrelatable to our class participants as well. And when we are honest about, I'm really struggling today, it makes I think fitness as well, not just us, but I think it makes the whole fitness experience relatable, because not everybody is going to be on it all the time. And it's okay if our class participants aren't feeling it all the time, because we aren't either. So yeah, I think having that, and it was like you said before about worrying about if people like us and like our classes, it always kind of does a full circle and comes back to being accepted, being a part of something as well, having that community and having that place of, actually it's not about being accepted, it's just about working together and sharing our experiences together. So that kind of brings us to actually what it looks like for class participants as well. So let's actually go back to that arrival practice. And what have you experienced in terms of class participants benefiting from that practice as well as instructors? I mean, like you said, them coming from their everyday lives, what does that arrival practice do for those class participants?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I saw right away was just feedback from class participants saying like, oh my gosh, I so needed that. I'm so glad that we took the time to kind of ease into this class and didn't jump right in, because my head was just in a completely different space. And then I've also seen as an instructor, like they haven't necessarily told me, but what I can see kind of from the outside is that they're much more able to kind of follow along with my cues and my instructions. So I don't feel like I have to kind of catch their attention as much. I can kind of give them a demonstration, walk them through the exercise, cue them, and they're staying with me the whole time. Because we all have that experience as instructors, or like we feel the reins slipping a little bit and we're like, I can tell that their mind is elsewhere, that they're really not hearing the words that I'm saying. And then it's like, how do you get that attention back once it's gone, right? So the arrival practice really kind of helps prevent that from happening in the first place, I feel like, by helping them to transition, because it's a big expectation to ask them to, come in and just kind of like take off the backpack of all their stress from the day instantly, right? And then just demand their full attention. Like that's not really fair. So it just makes it an easier experience, I feel like, for the student, and then also for you as an instructor being able to teach and have your teaching be effective.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really good to have that focus and that awareness, and starting with that, again, because you don't know where people are coming from and what experiences people are coming from, whether they're from their day or whether just from their everyday lives. A lot harder to teach a class when everyone's frantic, when there's that energy of like, and people are just coming, especially if it's a high impact class or high energy class. And you would think like this kind of arrival practice would be great for just yoga or just Pilates or the slower classes. But actually it's almost more important for those fast paced or high energy classes, because it means that you can be more focused on what you're doing and put more energy into that as well. And when you're coming into a practice or a class and you're having that moment to just be like, oh, okay, I'm here. What am I doing now? Being present, coming back to that present moment of like, okay, let's just focus on the one thing in front of me instead of the 101 things that I've had to do today, or I still have to do after this class. And it just brings everything back down, doesn't it? How would you, if they can kind of tell that their class participants are feeling that frantic or feel it, they can, and again, as fitness instructors, I think you can just tell the vibe and the energy of the class. What would you say outside of the arrival practice that instructors can do just to bring everyone together and to disperse any energy in the class or any stress in the class throughout the class?
Yeah, I love this question because this is like everything I want to do with Mindful Fit Pro, right? So there's really so much that you could do. It kind of depends on either what you're seeing happening, like maybe the person is really not understanding what you're asking them to do. Maybe they, were distracted and they didn't hear your cues and your directions, and so they're kind of like looking at the people next to them and trying to like infer like, okay, they're doing this, so I'm going to do this too, and the person next to them isn't doing the right thing either, or not the right thing, but like not what you asked, right?
Yeah.
So that can happen, and one of the things that at least I've had to do personally is kind of take a moment to pause when that happens and be like, okay, how can I say this differently so that maybe they didn't understand what I was asking, or understand my directions? Is there a way that I could say it differently? Can I demonstrate this? Because, we're asking them to perform and execute a certain movement, so they need to see that movement to really understand what we're asking of them. And kind of look at it as what can I do differently to kind of ease that experience for them. And then also recognizing that like, it's okay if their attention isn't on you 100% of the time, right? Because we're not really sure how much we can ask of them in that moment. So maybe they just had like a really, really stressful day. I have had clients come up to me and students come up to me before class and share, just really heavy emotional things that they're going through. And they're like, I really need this. I really need to be here today, but I'm just letting you know, I'm not sure how completely present I'm going to be in class, but I just needed to be here. I needed to be with my people. And it's great when people do tell you that, but a lot of times I think that happens and you don't necessarily get that insight. So knowing that like you don't have to be as firmly squeezing on those reins, that it's okay to kind of let go of some of that control as instructor. And at the end of the day, like as long as they're moving safely and they're not gonna like hurt themselves, then it's okay if they're doing things a little differently. Yeah.
Well, and what would you say how to recognize? So say like somebody has come to the class and I mean there's some people have informed you that they've got a lot going on, but maybe you've got those participants who are struggling mentally and struggling with some quite heavy situations maybe outside of a class. What are the things instructors can look for in participants? Is there any kind of symptoms or signs that you can really see in people if you know that they need a little bit extra help or just a little bit of reassurance because what they're dealing with outside of the class is a lot?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question too. And kind of the other like pillar that that the mental health side of Mindful Fit Pro stands for. So from my career as in psychology, I am in grad school on top of everything else I'm doing. I'm in grad school studying how to encourage people to seek help for mental health services. And it's a tricky situation. It's not as easy as telling someone like you should seek help because there's a lot of stigma there. There's sometimes some defensiveness. There's sometimes not even recognizing that like what you're experiencing is warranted of seeking help. Other times the mental health challenge itself is convincing you that you're not worthy of seeking help. So that's kind of what I really wanted to, along with the mindfulness aspect, the mental health aspect of Mindful Fit Pro, something that I wanted to bring the fitness community in, really showing fitness professionals what their role can be in helping their students and clients' mental health. So just statistically speaking, you know, like how do you recognize the signs of mental health challenges? Statistically speaking, you're going to have students in your class that are struggling with their mental health. There are definitely signs and things that we can see. Usually the kind of early symptoms of a mental health challenge are going to be changes in behavior, changes in thoughts and feelings, that internal dialogue. And so one of those we can see, right? Someone's behaviors, we can see a little bit of a piece of. We don't see that person 24/7, but we see them for a small portion of their day, their week. So we can see changes there in terms of like maybe they were that person that was at the front of the class and like they're almost like your go-to like second instructor if you needed to like point to someone as a demonstration of like what the next move is going to be. And then maybe they start to withdraw and kind of pull back from that. So you see kind of this sudden change in their behavior in that aspect. But then the other two big things, right? Changes in what our thoughts are, our cognitions, changes in our emotions. We can't see that we really have to talk to somebody about. So one of the things that I do with Mindful Fit Pro is mental health first aid, which is a program that's run nationally. It's globally. It started in Australia, and the US now has their own version of it. And it teaches somebody how to recognize those signs of when someone might be struggling, but really focuses on how do you have conversations about mental health, because we really don't know unless we start talking about it. Mm-hmm. So how would you kind of maybe approach that individual that you're concerned about? I think as fitness instructors and personal trainers, our sense of like intuition and empathy is really strong. It's why we do so well in our career. But with that, there's kind of like this hesitation because you don't want to say the wrong thing. So you might have this inkling, this like gut feeling that like, I think that person's kind of going through something, but I don't know what it is. And so a lot of people, I think, are nervous as to what to say. So they don't say anything at all, or they don't want to say the wrong thing, or maybe they convince themselves like, I must be like way out of the ballpark. Like, I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So what mental health first aid does is really helps you do kind of like role playing, and you get to practice having conversations, asking someone, you know, how they're feeling, and then actually wanting to hear that answer and not just the kind of off like, oh, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm okay. Like, no, actually
going through the motions of just a conversation of starter type.
Exactly. Like following through with that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the time, and I remember, I mean, I don't do a lot of personal training now, but I remember when I did personal training, and again, it is the same with group fitness classes. People come up to you and talk to you before and after. But I think a lot of the time, fitness isn't just about fitness, is it? It's about the social aspect. It's about getting away from whatever they've got going on. And a lot of the time when I did personal training, it was them speaking, just talking, just right. Almost like I was their therapist, just like talking. And I think sometimes we do more than just give people exercise. We are there as maybe somebody they feel they can come to outside of a doctor or outside of a friend or outside of anyone close to them. They feel like they can share some stuff with us, and it's again learning, like you said, learning how to respond to that, learning how to speak to them, which again doesn't offend or doesn't judge, and again listening. Mm-hmm. And hearing them and hearing the right things as well. So what would you say in terms of if somebody has come to you in class and just said, I'm really struggling with this a situation, we'll just keep it open, but I'm really struggling with this, or they do, you know, they kind of aren't, they want to open up to you, you know, that they kind of want to say something more, but they're holding back, and you're not sure whether to say something, like you're not sure whether to press it and push it further. What would you say to a fitness instructor in that kind of situation?
Yeah, I think it depends on maybe, you know, what they've shared with you, what they're struggling with. It's going to depend on the setting. Like, is this a group fitness class and there's a bunch of other people there, or is this a one-on-one session and maybe you're like in that person's house? Like, that's going to all factor into how willing that person is going to be to open up and share with you more information. So really recognizing that, like, what is the setting that you're in, and how that's going to influence whether or not someone even wants to like have this conversation to begin with, or if they just want to give you a little bit of an insight and then you kind of store that away and you maybe bring it up at a later point. That is really important, because you want the person to feel like they can feel safe confiding in you, right? Because that is very common, like you said, with private training and like personal training, that one-on-one session can kind of turn into a therapy session at times.
Yeah. If somebody mentioned something to you and you thought, I'm not sure if that's, you know, it's kind of, you kind of have a gut feeling of like, I'm not sure if that's, you know, something that I need to keep an eye on. The next time you see them, would you bring it up, or would you ask them how that specific thing is, or would you wait? I suppose what I'm saying is, would you invite them to speak, or would you wait until they then come back to you and talk more about it? Or again, does it depend on the situation and the setting? And
yeah, I think, you know, it does depend on the setting and how comfortable they're going to feel with you. I think it's wonderful that a lot of, you know, people feel like they have their personal trainer in their corner, and that's why they're opening up and sharing so much. So, you know, recognizing that, and also how it may be really difficult for them to share certain things. So I'm hesitant to say wait for them to open up, because sometimes it's not realistic to ask somebody to reach out. Like, you have to take the step to reach in, kind of, so to speak, and to ask them more questions about what's going on, and really just show a genuine interest in what that person is going through, you know, when the setting is appropriate for it, or to the best of your ability, right? So maybe it's saying like, I've noticed these XYZ happening, and, you know, I'm concerned, like, is there anything that, you know, you'd like to talk about? Like, I'm here for you if you do. I don't want to put any pressure on you, but I just want to keep that door open. If you want to talk to me about it, you can. There's different ways that we can kind of promote a culture where that's going to be more likely to happen for somebody to talk about their mental health experiences. So it kind of depends on like how comfortable you are with it, right? So myself, I'm very comfortable sharing my own experiences, and I talk about in class, like I talk about how I use my cardio training as like nervous system endurance training to like convince myself when I'm experiencing anxiety and like getting very panicky that I am still capable of kind of controlling my emotions to some degree, and at least manipulating my heart rate maybe through my breath, just like I would in an exercise class, right? So I kind of like to set the stage for it being very common for mental health to be talked about. I fully recognize not everybody feels comfortable doing that, right? So I don't want to say like you should go out and self-disclose if that's not something that feels appropriate for you to do so. I think that that's helped in my situation, though. People feel more comfortable opening up to me.
Yeah, it's like that thing of being relatable, isn't it? Like this, it's you've shared, so it's then it's almost like you've created a safe place for others to then share, because they've seen you vulnerable. So then they know it's kind of safe for them to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
What I would say as well, like if you don't want to approach somebody and ask them how they are, and you know that they probably won't, would you incorporate things like the breath work and things like in your actual class? So at least you know yourself that you've incorporated something that could possibly help and they could possibly take away with them as a tool for their own mental health. So if that barrier of like, nobody wants to talk, you're not sure whether to talk to them, and they aren't coming to you, would you add in things like that to your classes, or talk about the benefits of exercise for mental health in your classes so people are aware of that? Yeah, is there anything you would incorporate in classes to kind of help more with mental health?
Yeah, 100%. I think it could be different things. Like it could be pulling in those mindfulness practices and then sharing why we're doing this. I think that's important, just even if you're purely talking about the physical aspect of working out. Why are you doing this is really important to share, especially if it's something that's challenging. Like students want to know the purpose behind it so that they have an understanding of the reason of why they should do this. And so if it's like a mindfulness practice or, anything else, even if it's something that's like, oh, this will help us work on our balance and like train our vestibular system. Like I always like sharing the why behind what we're doing. Because I think, there's a spectrum of what we're going through, right? Some of our students are going to be facing mental health challenges, diagnoses maybe of mental illness, and that could range to what they're experiencing, how long they've been experiencing it. But maybe you're not going through a mental health challenge, but you still as a human being like experience thoughts and emotions, right? So the tools that I'm hopefully sharing with them, I think can apply to all of those people across that spectrum. It doesn't have to be someone who's necessarily in crisis at that moment. It could be just, hey, this is something we're going to practice in this setting. So we are aware of how to maybe kind of recognize where our thoughts are in this moment and recognize that our body's responding to those thoughts, and kind of that might trigger certain emotions and then lead us to tell ourselves certain stories we have on repeat that we've told ourselves for a while, that our physical body is going to respond to those thoughts. And then recognizing that sometimes those thoughts aren't even true, right? So it could be back to that simple thought of like, oh my God, are they going to like me? Are they going to like my class? And how that can spiral more thoughts of inadequacy and not belonging and not being good enough, right? But maybe that initial thought like wasn't even realistic to begin with, right? So there's all kinds of different things that you could do in your class. But definitely I think prioritizing, talking about how what you're doing can benefit health in general, whether it's physical health, mental health, they're one and the same, right? So I think that's really important.
Let's is there anything else you want to add to anything that we've talked about today, and what are the kind of top tips? So let's just in terms of mental health and mindfulness for the fitness professional and for class participants, what would you say to kind of sum up either the number one advice or the top three? What advice would you give each side of the coin, shall we say?
To sum up in a couple words, that's tough. But I think for the mindfulness aspect, I think just recognizing that, it's important to slow down, and to do what we can in that moment to be present. Not every moment is going to feel good to be present with. So recognizing that too. But I think that giving it, whether it's that moment of pause in the beginning for an arrival practice, or maybe taking some time for, in the middle of class before you're about to do something really tough, reminding students of like what they're already capable of, maybe reflecting on like how far they've come in their journey to set the stage for like, okay, yeah, I can do this. Like, this is not impossible what you're asking of me. to even like reflecting at the end of class, like whether it's a gratitude practice or just kind of checking in with how you're doing in that moment, with maybe no expectation. Maybe you're not expecting any change to have occurred. You're just checking in with how you are, because in that moment, maybe you realize like, oh my gosh, I'm really thirsty. Let me make sure I have water. Or like, oh my God, I'm really exhausted. So let me make sure that I can, you know, have that space to continue to rest when I get home. So that's important for both students and instructors, right? And then the mental health side, I think what I would want to know, I would want instructors to know, is just how important their role is in supporting the overall health of their students. A lot of times we focus on physical health because that's what we're trained in, and we don't fully recognize how much of an impact we play in mental health too. Because so many people, that's their first kind of foot in the door to coping with their mental health challenges. It's going to seek out a personal trainer because that feels a little easier to do than seeking out a therapist or a counselor, right? So I think just reminding yourself of like how big of an impact you can make in helping someone's life and improving their health.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, isn't it? I think exercise is that the start of feeling better for a lot of people, and the start of again, when we start to put our physical health first, that can have a huge effect on the health, our mental health, and taking steps forward in that journey, in that direction as well. This has been amazing. Where can people find out more about what you do? I know you've got an amazing, if I'm right, an amazing freebie for instructors. You have an ebook, is that right?
Yes, so I actually have two. So one of them is it's like a mindfulness guide essentially for fitness professionals. So it includes activities that you can do, like maybe it is at arrival practice. It talks about how you can use a body scan, and it gives you like takeaway activities that you can start implementing in your classes right away. And then it also touches on kind of a couple different case studies and like personal kind of experiences of how mindfulness can impact your client's experience with you, and impact their kind of overall journey with fitness. And then the other ebook free resource that I have is a resource guide for mental health resources. And this is something that I really put a lot of effort into, because I feel like sometimes it's hard to navigate resources. You might not know what's available in your community. So the ebook itself talks about the importance of your role as a fitness professional, how you impact mental health. And then there is a link to a directory essentially of national organizations, different kind of databases of professional like mental health services that you could link up to. And a lot of those you can search by zip code to see like who's closest to you. And so it's a several page document that just is really just a list of all these different services. So you can find one that really fits for you. There's different like special populations. So you can look at like, okay, what is available to specifically veterans? And then there's also more of the kind of like community support resources. So maybe you don't want to look up a therapist in your area, but you want to look up a support group, something that's maybe a little more approachable, more accessible to you at that moment. And then it kind of wraps up with how you would navigate, whether it's your insurance, like if you have insurance, how can you go about linking up with professional services? And if you don't have insurance, how can you go about finding accessible, affordable mental health services? Because I really just wanted to have that information out there for someone to easily go through, so that it kind of takes away at least that barrier of like the knowledge of what is out there.
Yeah, because when you are struggling, it's the last thing you want to do is search for is
Go on this
do
like
that
Google rabbit
research
hole,
and
right?
yeah, exactly. So that is amazing. So I'm going to put the links to those resources in the show notes.
Yeah, so I think easiest place to find me, I'm very active on social media. So it's at Mindful Fit Pro on Instagram and on Facebook. Facebook, I like to share more of blog posts and links to different articles. And then Instagram, I like to kind of show a behind the scenes look at like what I'm doing. And then really share kind of more bits and pieces of like little takeaway messages of like, oh, you could try maybe adding this to your next class to maybe increase mindfulness. And then my website is also a great resource. So mindfulfitpro.com. And on that website, I announce upcoming courses. So right now I have an upcoming mental health first aid training, and then things I'm working on in the future is going to be a mindfulness training for fitness professionals, so that you can learn more, whether it's for yourself, you want to learn how to practice mindfulness and kind of not feel like you're adding more to your plate by doing that, or if you want to go through it specifically to help your students and look at like, how can I add and incorporate and infuse more mindfulness into my instruction.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, we will get you on again, and we'll focus on specific techniques and do more of like a podcast training almost.
Yeah,
we are going to be working together on, there's going to be a training in one of my memberships which Shelly is going to contribute to. So that's coming up as well. So many wonderful things. And I know we're going to be collaborating more in the future. But I just want to say a huge thank you for being on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to everything that you've got coming and everything that we can do together as well in the future.
Oh, thank you. I am so grateful for this opportunity to kind of be on your podcast and maybe connect with your listeners in that way. And I am really excited about all the things that we have coming in the future working together. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Mindful Fit Pro podcast. I hope you liked listening to the replay of Charlotte Brawn's podcast, Heart My Fit Biz, and I hope you got to know a little bit more about myself and what I offer with the Mindful Fit Pro. I hope you head on over to Charlotte's website, check out her membership. One of the cool things about Charlotte Brawn's Fitness Business Masterclass membership is you can learn from me. I recorded a workshop for Charlotte's membership that focuses on mindfulness and how you can use an arrival practice at the beginning of your classes. And then I share this technique called resonance breathing. This is what I use to help me balance my own nervous system. And when I'm facing those pre-class jitters, it's what helps me calm down. And it's also a technique that you can use in your classes and you can teach to your students to help them arrive and get ready for your workout together. I'll include the link to Charlotte's membership and all the details that you'll need to know to get connected with her in the show notes below. The link is an affiliate link, so I do get a little bit of a kickback if you use it, but I think this is a great resource for fitness professionals like you. Until next time, I hope you have a great time teaching, and I'll catch you on the next episode.